Okay, we're going to do our remediation on the ratios and rates test. I'm going to go over some things that I want you to recognize when you're reading these questions that would help you answer these questions correctly. So we're going to look at question number 1 first. The ratio of boys to girls. So that's really important how they state it in the ratio in the question. So we're comparing boys to girls. In Mr. Green's class is 4 to 5, which means there's 4 boys and 5 girls. So there's 4 boys for every 5 girls. There are 8 boys in the class. So we want to put the 8 where the boys are in the numerator. How many girls are in the class? So this one would be solved simply by saying, if I multiply the numerator by 2, then I must multiply the denominator by 2, and that would give me 10 girls. So the answer here would be C. Let's move on to number 2. Number 2, similar. All of these questions would be solved, or I should say most of these questions are solved by simply setting up a proportion. Anytime you have a comparison, you can solve a comparison, which is a ratio, through setting up a proportion. Raul drove 80 miles. This represents 50% of his entire trip. Now, when you look at 50%, I want you to think of half. 50% as a fraction is half. So when he drives 80 miles, this represents half of his entire trip. Not the whole trip, half of his trip. So when we set up this particular percent proportion, of course the 50, the percent always goes over 100. Now the 80 miles was half his trip. That's the part of his trip. We're looking for how much his whole trip was. 80 miles was not the whole trip, it was half the trip. So 50 does not go evenly into 80. So what we'll do is we'll simply simplify this particular ratio, and 50 over 100 simplifies to 1/2. And then we'll say 1 times 80 is 80. So we'll do 2 times 80, and that'll give us 160. So the answer here was C. Number 3. The ratio of greenhouses to white, so this is very important, green to white. So let's write that down. Green to white on Winthrop Street is equal to 2 green and 3 white. There are 60 white houses on Winthrop Street. So we are going to put the 60 in the denominator because the white is in the denominator, and we want to know how many greenhouses. So if the ratio is 2 to 3, if there are 60 white houses, how many greenhouses would there be? Well, very simply, whatever we multiply the denominator by, which would be 20, we will multiply the numerator by, and 2 times 20 would give us 40. So the answer here would be C. Number 4. What is 40% of 120? So there's 2 ways to do this one, because they're giving us, or what they're asking us, is the percent of, and in this case, of means multiply, a number, which would be 120. So let's do both methods. First, let's make our percent proportion, which would be putting our percent of 40 over 100 and the of in the denominator, and we simply want to know the is, or the part. Now we know that 100 doesn't go into 120, so we'll simply simplify, and we could say 10 goes into this 4 times, and 10 goes into 100 10 times. At this point, we'll simply just say 10 times 12 gives us 120, so 4 times 12 gives us 48. And C would be our answer right there. It's all a matter of simply setting up a proportion. If it doesn't go evenly, just simplify the ratio that they give you, and then you could simply figure out the missing piece. Number 5. Number 5, a little bit different. Not a proportion. This has to do with a coordinate grid. The graph above shows the distance traveled by Mr. Wentz. Here's the distance in miles, which would be the y-axis, and the time would be the x-axis, as he drove on the freeway. According to the graph, how far did Mr. Wentz travel after driving for 40 minutes? So, when he drove for 40 minutes, which would be right here, he's driving along, here's 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. What was the distance that he traveled? He traveled 40 miles. So the answer, 40 miles. Here he is before he started. And here he's driving along. Here's 20 minutes. And then he's driving along. And when he hits 40 minutes right here, he had gone 40 miles. Question 6. Another percent proportion question, or percent of a number. Either way, let's first set up the proportion. We'll put the 30% over 90, and then we will have, the 30 goes over 100, the percent goes over 100, and the of goes in the denominator, and we're looking for the is. 190, I can't multiply anything, so I'll simply simplify again. 10 goes into 30 3 times, and 10 goes into 100 10 times, and then I simply say 10 times 9 is 90, and 3 times 9 is 27. So the answer here is B. Also here, I could say point or 30 hundredths times 90, and I could multiply. When you multiply as if there are no decimals. At this point, I'll count the number of digits to the right of the decimal, 1, 2, and I'll move my decimal in 2 times, and my answer would be 27. Either way. The last question on this page, approximately what percent of the rectangle below is shaded? Well, the total amount of boxes, let's go down here. The total amount of boxes is 12. The shaded part is 4. So if I want to turn this into a percent, there's a problem. Because if I simplify this to 1/3, 3 doesn't go into 100. So at that point, I have to take my ratio 1/3 or 4/12 because they're equivalent, and I have to divide. I literally have to say 1 divided by 3. 3 does not go into 1. I'll put a 0. I'll put my decimal point, and I'll put a 0 there. 3 goes into 10 3 times, and that would give me 9. And then that would give me 1. I would bring down another 0, and I would have a 0.33. I move the decimal twice to the right, and that would give me B, which is 33%. When you have a fraction that even when you simplify cannot go into 100, then you turn your fraction into a decimal by dividing. Once you divide, you move the decimal twice to the right, and that would be your percent. Number 8. Number 8 says, Alexandra completed 40% of a 50-question assignment. So, how many questions did she complete? She completed 40%, 40 over 100. The total assignment was 50 questions. How many did she complete? Whatever we do to the denominator, we must do to the numerator. What number times 2 is 40? 20. So the answer here is B. Number 9 is a unit rate question that requires division. Patricia paid $385 for 5 nights. Find the unit rate. So the percent proportion, we set it equal to 100. For a unit rate, we set the denominator equal to 1. We paid $385 for 5 nights. How much money for 1 night? Any number divided by itself gives me 1. So whatever I do to the denominator, I have to do the same thing to the numerator. So I'm going to move over here, and I'm going to say 385 divided by 5. 5 does not go into 3, but 5 goes into 38 7 times. 7 times 5 is 35. 38 minus 35 is 3. Bring down the 5. 5 goes into 35 7 times. So that will give me $77 per night for 1 night, and the answer would be A. Number 10. Very similar question. Well, this is a conversion question. Number 11 is similar to number 9. Let's first go to number 11 because it's a similar question. And then we'll come back to 10. A car travels at 360 miles on 18 gallons of gas. So it travels 360 miles on 18 gallons of gas. Write the unit rate. So I want to know how many miles per gallon I get. Any number divided by itself gives me 1. So whatever I do to the denominator, I must do to the numerator. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to do 360 divided by 18. 18 does not go into 3, but it goes into 36 twice. 18 times 2 is 36. I'm not done because each number in the house has to be represented by a number on top of the house. So I bring down my 0 and I represent it with a 0. and it would be 20 miles per gallon. So the answer here would be B. Let's go to number 10, where we have a conversion ratio of 1 yard equals 3 feet. So we're comparing yards to feet. 1 yard equals 3 feet. The Alsea Bay Bridge in Oregon is about 970 yards long. How many feet is this? Well, I'm going to put the 970 where the yards go, and they want to know how many feet. I'm going to multiply the numerator by 970. Whatever I do to the numerator, I must do to the denominator. So 970 times 3, let's come over here and do that. 970 times 3. 3 times 0 is 0. 3 times 7, 21. Carry the 2. 3 times 9 is 27. Plus 2 is 29. And it's 2,910 feet. The answer here would be A. All of these questions are ratios. They're comparisons. If you set up your proportion correctly, you put your numbers in the correct spot, you'll get them all right, because you simply have to just multiply or divide. The key here is setting up your proportions correctly. Let's go to question number 12. Which ratio is equivalent to 3/20? Well, all we've been doing the whole test is writing equivalent ratios. Whatever we do, multiply or divide the numerator by, if we do the same to the denominator, it's an equivalent ratio. So let's check it out. I have 3/20. If I put a 5 and 100, 20 times 5 is 100. 3 times 5 is not 5. So this cannot be the answer. So now I'll take 100 to 5. 3/20 equals 100 to 5. Well, this makes no sense at all, because how can a fraction be equal to an improper fraction? 100 divided by 5 is 20. 3 divided by 20 is less than 1. But if you want to go through it, 5 times 4 is 20. 100 times 4 would be 400. So there's no way that could be correct. Let's look at 140 to 21. Same thing. 3/20 cannot be equal to 140 to 21. This is less than 1. This is an improper fraction, which is more than 1. So we really don't even have to see if it's equivalent. It can't be equivalent. But let's look at the next one. 3/20, is it equivalent to 21/140? Well, they're both proper fractions, so that's encouraging. Now let's check it out. 3 times 7 is 21, and 20 times 7 is 140. So they are equivalent, and the answer is D. The last question. Convert 17 gallons to cups. Well, they give you a conversion ratio of 1 gallon equals 16 cups. So they ask you, how many cups is in 17 gallons? Well, that doesn't seem very hard. put the 17 where the gallons are. Whatever you do to the numerator, do to the denominator. So the answer has to be 16 times 17. 7 times 6, 42. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 4 is 11. 1 times 6, 1 times 1. And the answer would be D, 272 cups. Couple of things. When you're taking a test, it's always good to put what you're comparing. Yards to feet, gallons to cups. This should be dollars to nights. It helps you organize your work. It keeps everything neat so you don't put any numbers in the wrong space. When it comes to unit rates, you put a 1. You would put a 1 in the denominator in your second ratio. When you're doing percents, you're going to put 100. And the percent over 100, the part over the whole, or the is over the of. So there you have it. There are the answers to the Unit 3 test on proportionality, ratios, and rates. And if there are any questions, we'll go over it tomorrow. All right. Take care, everybody.